Hello, everybody. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today, I get to talk to a military veteran, which I often do not get to. So I am looking forward to this conversation, probably more than you are. And to top it all off, he is an F-14 real life goose, just like the movie Top Gun. I asked him before this, were you a fighter pilot? And he was like, no. More appropriately, I was Goose. So he's a backseater on the F-14, a Navy officer. Yes. So I am excited.
There you go.
But he agrees with me that withdrawal from a benzo was worse than our military service, deployments, and all the things that we've experienced. So that can give you a frame of reference on how intense this experience was. We both share a lot in common. So I am so looking forward to this conversation. So welcome, Mark.
It's great to be here, Angie. Glad to finally meet you. You know, I've followed your stuff for a long time, and thanks for being so candid, and I know that's helped a lot of people.
Thank you, Mark.
Trying to do the same thing. Yeah.
Thank you. So we are going to make our way through post-traumatic stress, burn pits, toxic exposure, the disability system, treatment at VA and other providers, and psychedelic-assisted therapies. So we have a lot to cover. So let's just start off to get grounded in the thing that we do relate to on the most, and that is Ativan. Can you tell me what put you on a benzo in the first place? And then we'll talk about your recovery process after.
Yeah. So short answer on what put me on a benzo is, after I retired from active duty in 2012, after 20 years, a lot of combat, I'd accumulated many things that I can't point to one thing exactly that got me into the state I got into, but I had no underlying anxiety disorder or any history of any mental health struggles or anything. I came from one of the most scrutinized communities on planet Earth, so I looked pretty healthy when I got out. But after outside of the structure of the Navy, it was revealed how much I was holding myself together, I guess. And a lot of things happened, but it culminated in a single panic attack. And, one panic attack, a call to a doctor, and I was taking 0.5 milligram of Ativan 4 times a day for 4.5 years without any kind of informed consent. The prescriber didn't understand tolerance dependence, paradoxical effects, and all the secondary and tertiary things that come out of those. He didn't understand interactions with alcohol. He did not understand how to responsibly deprescribe, and that's a huge part of my story. Is 4.5 years of a beatdown, where I went to my prescriber every 90 days, told him what was going on in my life, which was a steady descent into hell. And he sat there and listened and nodded and said nice things and just wrote me another script. He never put it together that it was the Ativan that was pushing me under. I didn't either, and there's a good reason for that. If you want to talk about that, but
yeah, you said something really important, Mark, that I want to latch onto really quick. I often get the argument that maybe this happened to you because you were pre-existingly mentally ill. Okay. And it's a way to silence some of the things that I share that can be really provocative, possibly. But you're making a really good point here that people in the military are scrutinized on a daily basis for their mental health. Okay. You cannot be a backseater on an F-14 with anxiety. It's impossible. Okay. I could not have gotten deployed to Iraq and led troops on convoys 3 times a week, loaded weapons, if I had anxiety. It's incompatible to what we are talking about. Okay. So let's just talk really quick on that descent into madness from the benzo, because I experienced the same exact thing. And I ended up in a place that didn't look anything like me or my life or what it was like when I was in the military. So people like us, we have a little bit more credibility, I think, because I have 7 years of active duty military service and you have 20 underneath your belt before this happened to you. You were not mentally ill. I was not mentally ill. I did not have somatic symptoms. It didn't exist. Okay. We were at the highest level of our mental and physical capability. We trained every single day. So can you talk about what that benzo did to you in that 4 years, and then let's get into your withdrawal process.
Yeah. Okay. So you're absolutely right. I mean, I certainly cleared a lot of high bars. I would say I was one of the most highly trained professionals on planet Earth. I don't think it's a stretch or braggadocious to say that. And performing, at an extremely high level. Looking back, the last couple of years in uniform, maybe 3-4 years, I was definitely hanging on more and more. But for me, it felt like I was just super motivated and I just had a lot of energy and I was just go, go, go. And it actually kind of made me productive. Even after I got out, I was, very gung ho and, working 18 hours on my startup business and, all these things. I realize now looking back, what that was anxiety. But I used it as throttles. I just had a lot of thrust on making things happen.
And they called me high strung, so I can relate to that too. High strung.
Yeah. Looking
motivated.
back over the years, well, it kind of crept in. It's a little insidious while you're in. It's insidious. You just go, go, go. It's everything's about the mission, and you keep pushing yourself. And I just didn't realize how far I drifted. So, I'm not going to say I was great when I got out of uniform. I just didn't understand this. I called it stuck throttles at the time. Like I just couldn't slow down. There were some very situational things that happened in my life that led me to a single panic attack, just one. And I'd never had a panic attack before. As a matter of fact, I would have dismissed that as some, weak-minded bullshit that's made up, like a lot of people still do. That is absolutely not the case. When it snuck up on me, when it hit me, it was brutal. I thought I was dying. I was convinced I was having some kind of cardiac event or something like that. I called the doctor. He said, no, it's a panic attack and we got to put you on the Ativan. So, by the time I got down to the pharmacy, the panic attack was over. I was anxious, but the panic attack was over. And, I didn't know what a benzodiazepine was. I didn't know what Ativan was. I didn't know any of this stuff. I didn't even know that word. I'd never heard the word benzo in my life. But by the time I got down to the pharmacy, I felt okay. But, the doctor told me to take this 4 times a day. So I took one. And nothing profound happened when I took it. An hour later, maybe I went, oh, I feel pretty good. It was subtle. Honestly, it was really subtle. And so I didn't think much of it. I just kept taking that stuff and life went along just fine for a while. I cleaned up some things in my life that were causing me a lot of stress and probably triggered that panic attack, some relationships and stuff that was hanging on. But, once I cleaned that up, I actually had a really good stretch where I was doing well. My business was growing. I was engaged. I actually felt pretty sharp for a while. I'd say at about 2 years. It's really hard to put a pin in exactly when it was, but somewhere in there. Yeah, 2 years is probably right. By 2 years, I was losing cognitive function to the point where I was not effective in running my business. I couldn't keep my thoughts straight, short-term memory problems, lots of anxiety, really bad anxiety, sleep disturbances got terrible. And I recognized that something was wrong, but in no way did it occur to me that it was the Ativan. And I didn't even apply for VA disability till a couple years after I got out. I didn't want to be on disability. I viewed myself as a strong and healthy guy, and I was life was going to go great. And so I kind of shunned all that. I just wasn't interested in it. By the time I was really going downhill and went, oh shit, this is affecting my ability to function, my ability to earn a living. I knew something bad was going on. I said, crap, I need to go apply for that. An interesting note about the VA disability system. By the time I had any interest in figuring out how to apply for disability, I was cognitively compromised to the point where I had little chance of successfully navigating the application process. And I see that over and over. The people who need disability the most, particularly when it's cognitive or psych stuff, are the least likely to do it. You can't get there. And, I applied multiple times and I never really got there, and just kept getting downhill and going downhill. And, was just demoralized and, ended up in survival mode after a while. But, that slide continued for a couple of years. And, what's interesting, after he cold turkeyed me, I started, educating myself because I trusted no one at that point. I certainly didn't trust the prescribing physician. And it became clear to me I needed to educate myself to save myself. And one of the things I came across was a document called the VA DOD Clinical Guidelines for Treatment of PTSD. Yeah.
Yep. And what did it say about benzos?
There is a page in there, or actually 2 pages, that has very specific language about that benzos are contraindicated in PTSD for the following reasons. And that list was everything I went through: depression, anxiety, addiction, substance use problems, suicidality. I mean, everything I'm reading this thing, I'm going, all of this has happened to me. And I'll tell you, it made me really angry because that document had been around for a while.
Yes. And, I think 2010 was when it was published.
Correct. So we're talking like 2015 here. That'd been around for 5 years and had several revisions. And yet the VA was still prescribing benzos. And a lot of guys were still, it seems to have gotten better now from where I'm sitting, I think. But at that time, they were still cranking those things out. They called it the combat cocktail. I know you've talked about it. And so, that was a huge violation. But I did not get my benzos from the VA. I had a horrible, horrible experience at the VA. I went to a very expensive private practitioner when my disgust with the VA reached the point where I wasn't dealing with them anymore. And so there's no reason to expect that he would have read that document. But, here's a red flag if you're in your provider's office. When you tell him what you're going through and he starts Googling stuff, like, walk out of the office. I don't need a Google concierge for $250 an hour. And looking back, that was his thing. He would start Googling stuff, and I'm like, oh my God, what was I paying him for?
So tell us, Mark, what was your wake-up call that you needed to get off benzos, or why did he cold turkey you, and what was that like?
Okay, so this is a real ugly part of the story. So as I stayed on the same dose from day one. So 4.5 years taking 2 milligrams a day of Ativan. Of course, I developed a tolerance, and with that, a dependence. And as such, to maintain the same effect, I would have had to steadily increase my dose over all those years, but that never happened. So I ended up in tolerance withdrawal, meaning that, I'm still taking the drug and it has a little bit of effect when I take it, but the rebound just gets worse and worse and worse and worse. And that went on for many years. As a result of that, I experienced profound paradoxical effects. And this is, the part that he just had no awareness of. What are those paradoxical effects? So, Ativan's a tranquilizer. It calms you, right? So my paradoxical effects were increased anxiety, right? So I'm taking a med for anxiety that made my anxiety worse. And it was a lot worse and continued to get worse to the point where, I wanted to shoot myself in the head because it was too uncomfortable to be in my skin. So, along with that, what are the other effects? Extreme disinhibition. I was saying and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. Couldn't do risk reward calculations. It was kind of like being drunk all the time. Derealization. So walking around with a sense that I'm in a movie or something. Nothing's real. I didn't know these words at the time. I learned these later, but this is definitely what I experienced. Depersonalization. Like I felt like I was walking around outside of myself, watching this body live somebody else's life. Before I knew those terms, I said to the guy, I feel like I'm watching my life unravel, and I'm doing it through a dirty window, is what it felt
Man,
like.
that is exactly what it. Wow.
Yeah, that's what it was like. So, I was at the Hampton VA hospital one time. There's this young Marine, nice kid, had really bad PTSD, bouncing off the walls. He and I kind of tracked through the hospital that day with all our intake stuff, kind of in parallel. I talked to him, good kid. His wife was with him. She had her hands full. He was really bouncing off the walls. But I encountered him out in the parking lot when I was leaving that day. And he said, "Man, you need marijuana." And he whips out a bag of marijuana. I'm like, I didn't know where to get the marijuana.
Thanks.
I was a recently retired, senior officer. I'm like, okay, but he handed me the weed. And so I took it. And I'll tell you, I had smoked weed before. I'm not going to say I'm that much of a Boy Scout, back in college a little bit. But I went home, I smoked some, and I went to sleep. And that was a gift from God, because I was sleeping 2-3 hours a night. No matter what I did, I couldn't get back to sleep after I woke up. I had a hard time falling asleep, and then I would wake up and I just couldn't go to sleep. I was losing my mind because of sleep deprivation. So a little bit of weed, and hey, I'm sleeping.
Yeah.
And so it took a while. I don't have any huge moral reservation about weed or anything, but it helped me sleep. And I was really grateful for that. The problem is I was disinhibited, and my anxiety was horrible. So what happened is, I just started smoking earlier and earlier. It wasn't right before bed a little bit. It was
all day,
more and more. And, I come home from work, I'm anxious. I'm like, okay, the weed helps. And I just got on this road where, eventually I was waking up in the morning smoking weed, not a little. Like I was Cheech and Chonging it all day long, because it's the only way I could stand to be in my skin.
Yeah. Because you were trying to medicate the symptoms that you were getting from the benzo, but you didn't recognize that. Neither did a physician. So you can only, same as me, you can only stand to reason, I don't feel good and I'm going to do what works. That's why I got opiates. Were a very slippery slope for me, because I was managing a prior benzo withdrawal and didn't know it.
Bingo. You got to know what it is to understand. And, I just didn't. All I knew is this helped me a little bit. I was severely disinhibited. So, I couldn't sit there going, wait, I'm smoking way too much weed. I was just trying to survive every day,
Yeah.
And you can't be a productive member of society if you're smoking weed all day. You just can't. I was already neglecting or failing at my business. And then I got lazy and I just stopped caring, and, went to work less and less, and I, self-employed. So, that led to more depression. Now I'm not leaving the house. I'm depressed. My financial life's falling apart. I can see that I'm headed to a bad place. I don't understand why at all. And unfortunately for me, I got connected to some pretty shady people who were selling me the weed. And I think they recognized that I had access to cash, and they were happy to offer me other substances with better profit margins. And, I ended up trying cocaine. And, the first time I was offered cocaine, it was, just a little tiny, little bump, and I sorted up my nose and I felt better. I didn't get high. I felt better. My focus came up right away. I had some energy. I felt positive. I wanted to work. And so I started taking these, clearly not aligned with my moral model in any way.
No.
But I am so disinhibited that I can't do risk reward calculations. That's one of the things you're robbed of on these things. And, because of that, I was on a rocket sled to addiction. So, these little bumps to function, and it really was to function, it became huge lines. And eventually I ended up injecting it. I'm an engineer. I recognized how inefficient snorting it was, and I was like, "Hey, well, if I
What's the
inject it," and
better
somebody,
way? Yeah.
I saw a guy inject it. I went to pick up cocaine one day, and a guy was injecting, and I watched him inject. And he was like, "Oh yeah," and he was really. And I'm like, he saw me looking at him. He's like, "Hey, you want to try it?" And I said, "Yes," which is insane.
Listen, I've been in very similar places. I also did cocaine. I've never really admitted that publicly. And that was when I was on 18 medications at the same time. So you
can't think.
You can't think straight, okay? And I hate, the reason I don't say that publicly is because there's shame, because people interpret that as, see, she's a drug addict. That's why benzos were so hard. No, it absolutely has nothing to do with that. And it has everything to do with when your nervous system is so sensitized, you will do anything to feel a little bit better. It's not, and when you're disinhibited, you will do anything to feel better, including really crazy shit that's outside of your moral compass, like you said. And I'm glad that you're here when I say that to back me up a little, because that's how thick the shame is, you know? And the reason I stopped everything, and it's funny to me now, actually, that I quit, I like put myself in detox 4 times, okay? And one of those times they took me off 8 or 10 of the medications and left me on 8. And I stopped the cocaine and I stopped the opiates and everything at once. And looking back, I'm like, oh my God, I was in akathisia and didn't even know it. I had these homicidal thoughts and in rehab at the VA hospital. But I fell into a victim of, and I think this is what's happening to veterans too, that, oh, well, now we have to treat your comorbid condition. The reason why you're using those drugs, here's more psych drugs. And I'm like, man, if I could have just stuck to cocaine, like that's a much easier habit to kick, because I only used it for 4 months.
Side effect whack-a-mole. They start playing side effect whack-a-mole. And nobody knows. By the time you get your 3rd psych med, nobody has any clue about interactions.
No.
None. And they mean well, and they're trained wrong, and they just keep throwing stuff at you.
Yeah. And so while you were talking, I pulled up my benzo paper that I wrote in 2019 for the VFW. And I just want to say 2 quotes. 30% of veterans enrolled in VA care were currently holding a benzodiazepine prescription in 2012, 2 years after the release of that. Benzos are contraindicated for veterans with PTSD. And then here's the second quote I want to bring up. Hold on. It's about veterans. Wait, I just had it and then I lost it. Polypharmacy is what I want to quote, and I'll edit this later, don't worry. Okay. The patients with comorbid PTSD, TBI, and depression have the highest rates of CNS polypharmacy, putting them at highest risk for poor outcomes. The subpopulation of veterans with mental health difficulties, depression, and brain injury may be experiencing greater effects than other groups that the VHA is currently focused on, such as the geriatric population. A study of over 200,000 veterans with PTSD found that veterans exposed to benzos were almost 3 times as likely to attempt and die by suicide than veterans without that exposure. And you cannot tell me that as the VA has tried to deprescribe benzos, why is our suicide rate so high? How do you answer that?
Well, deprescribing incorrectly is obviously a problem. When you're coming off of multiple psych, it's a problem. When you're on 7 or 8 psychoactive meds, deprescribing, the sequence and the pace at which you deprescribe is absolutely critical. I wonder how many of these suicides are during deprescription.
I want to know that too, really bad. I want to know.
I totally.
It makes me sick to think about it, just because me and you both had that same experience. And let's talk about that. I want to hear about your Ativan withdrawal really quick before we start on your healing process. But when you go through this brutal withdrawal period that we do, and I don't like the word withdrawal. I'm actually writing a Substack post about this right now. I don't like the word withdrawal. It's not withdrawal technically. I mean, it is kind of, but when you're cold turkeyed after using these substances for 4.5 years, for me, it was 13 on and off benzos, your nervous system blows up. Okay. It turned you, an F-14 goose backseater. I don't know, it's the closest thing to a fighter pilot I've ever known. Okay, whatever. But when it turns you to a man crawling on the floor, begging for your life, wanting to die every second, that's not that's more than withdrawal. Like withdrawal is a euphemism for complete nervous system destruction, if you ask me. So let's talk about that place that we've both visited that is hell on earth and there's no language to explain. But what was that like for you being cold turkey?
Oh, yeah. So it's a profound neurological injury, is what it is. And I remember thinking, my body is a prison that I'm trapped in, and it is an absolute torture chamber. Uh, and that led to severe suicidality. But what was the withdrawal like? So, um, yeah, here's what happened. So, my IV cocaine use got extreme. I was not at that level of addiction for very long, but it was very intense when I did it. And I very quickly realized I was going to end up dead. I just had no control, no brakes whatsoever. So I went to the guy and said, "Hey, look at what I'm doing to myself. Like, I need help." And he said, "You need to go to rehab." And I said, "No shit." And he said, "We need to get you off the Ativan." And to
I
that
see.
point, I didn't realize Ativan was a controlled substance. I had no understanding
Same.
whatsoever of what Ativan really was. And he said, "We got to get you off of it." And he cut me by 25% right there in the office. And 2 weeks later, he cut me to 50%. And I was losing my marbles on that 50%. I also happened to be in the middle of a move, so it was a little stressful. But the level of anxiety I was experiencing was, I mean, like nothing I'd ever even conceived of. I was bouncing off the walls. I couldn't walk into the next room and remember why I was going there. I was hyper in the extreme. I was paranoid. There was all kinds of conspiracies going on. People were trying to kill me and steal things from me, and I wasn't sleeping. So had a little bit of Ativan left, a little extra Ativan left. And I was wigging out so bad that I went, "Oh my God, I need to take some more Ativan." I went back up to 4 a day, which was the worst thing I could have done. Or maybe I needed to go right back there. I probably needed to be on 8 a day and then do a Valium replacement is what I needed to do. But I didn't know that at this point. So I went back up for a few days and then ran out of pills. Again, I was moving during this too. So my whole life was chaotic. And I hadn't been warned, so I just stopped taking it. And over the next 2 weeks, a lot of things happened. So as I went up that climb to the peak of acute withdrawal. So, in the first few days when I went from 4 a day to nothing, I was waking up crazy early, like 3:30 in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, with all this energy. And I like to run in the morning. And I had all this crazy energy. So I'm running 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, up to 10 miles in the dark every morning just to try to burn off the energy.
Yeah.
It was crazy. And I was actually a little euphoric. It was weird at the beginning of it. Like, it was like I had endless energy and I just, spent it on everything I could. But over a couple of weeks, that got unmanageable. It went from a lot of energy to, I want to claw myself out of my skin. And the anxiety got worse. I stopped sleeping. I got to a point where I wasn't sleeping at all. I had the sensation of like ice water being dumped over my head every couple of minutes, like literally ice cold water. I could feel it running down my face and my chest and my back. It was the most bizarre. I'm like,
I have felt the same thing.
What is this?
It was just like a drip. I would feel a drip. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
and
weird.
I had all this weird tingling all over my body. I was shaky. I was weak. I couldn't hold a thought. I could not string two little nuggets of thought together to save my life. I was just bouncing off the walls. Eventually, I started foaming at the mouth. I was running into things around the house, falling down, dropping glasses. But when I started foaming at the mouth, that's when I really went, "Oh my God, like, what is wrong with me?" And this part of my story right here, it just really captures a big chunk of the problem. So I started Googling all this list of symptoms I had, which was lengthy. And, and I came up with multiple sclerosis.
Of course.
A common misdiagnosis during benzodiazepine withdrawal or tolerance withdrawal, right? It happens all the time. It's the same symptoms. Interestingly, my brother happens to have MS. So I called my brother up, explained to him what I was going through, didn't know it was the Ativan. This is an important point. I didn't know it was the Ativan. I had no idea. I tell him my symptoms, and he says, "You've got MS, and it's bad. And if you don't get to a neurologist now, you might die." Which, if it was MS, was probably true. But, so I called my general practitioner and begged for an appointment, and, it was 2 weeks. I wasn't going to get an appointment. So, I took the 2-week appointment and resigned myself to toughen it out for a couple of weeks. But my brother called me back the next day and said, "Have you been taking benzodiazepines?" "What's a benzo what? Benzodiazepine?" He's like, "Benzos." I'm like, "I don't know what that is." And he said, "Like Xanax." I'm like, "God, I wouldn't take Xanax. I know that stuff's bad." And he said, "Well, there's other ones." And he starts listing them, and he gets to Ativan, and I go, "Oh, yeah, I've been taking that for years. I just stopped a couple of weeks ago." And he went, "Dude, you're in benzodiazepine withdrawal." My brother, who's not a physician, had to tell me this because he'd seen a couple of his friends go through. So I called the physician's office. He was on vacation. At this point, my fury was at 11. And I was very insistent that I get the doctor on the phone. And, later that day, I did get a call from the doctor. And, I'm picturing him on a lounge chair under a palm tree with some kind of coconut drink with a little umbrella in it, and a long straw. And he was pissed that I was bothering him on his vacation. But I explained to him, I was probably talking a million miles a minute and, spit falling out of my mouth. But I went through the whole thing that I was going through. And he said to me at the end of that, he went, "Mark, it's stress."
Please.
Yeah. He said, "It's stress." And I insisted that this was much more than stress. And he said, "No, it's stress." And we got off the phone. He called me back. I think it was the next day or maybe much later that day. I can't remember. He called me back, and I'm picturing him now whipping out the Google on his lounge chair with his coconut drink. And he said, "Okay, I looked into this a little bit. Yeah, maybe you are in benzo withdrawal." He said, "I'm going to write you a script for Valium," which was the correct answer. I did not know this at the time. But he said, "I'm going to write you a script for Valium." And I'm like, anything that makes us stop is fine with me. "I'm going to write you a script for Valium." And I said, "Hey, I usually get my stuff through the mail order, Express Scripts, the mail order pharmacy." I said, "It takes 10 days. Send it to my local pharmacy. I'm going to go down there right now and get it because I'm losing my mind here. I had slept in days at this point too." Well, he screwed up, sent it to the mail order pharmacy. But in the days, it took 10 days for it to get to me, like I said. In those days, I started reading about benzodiazepines. Found out that Valium is another benzodiazepine. Oh, hell no. I'm not taking another benzodiazepine because I don't understand at this point, and neither does he. What's even worse, even though, much later I found the Ashton manual and figured out how to, how all that works, a Valium replacement was probably a good idea. What he didn't understand, though, is two things. One, my 2 milligrams of Ativan, I was in horrible withdrawal, tolerance withdrawal. I probably needed to be on 4-6 milligrams of Ativan. At some point you run out of headroom. You can't, it just doesn't have any more effect. But,
Yeah.
I probably needed to be on a much higher dose of Ativan. But then he screwed up the conversion too, because Valium is, a tenth the
10 to
potency
1.
of Ativan, right? It's a 10 to 1. So I was on 2 milligrams of Ativan. I needed to be on 20 milligrams of Valium as an equivalent, probably 40, 50, or 60 milligrams, which would kill a horse, but not when you have that much tolerance. But he didn't know any of that. So he prescribes me 2 milligrams of Valium, which wouldn't have done anything. And it took 10 days to get there. So in those 10 days, an interesting thing happened. is, I had a very steep climb to the peak of acute withdrawal. Very, very steep. And the peak was excruciating. By the way, I don't blame anyone who kills himself at that point. It makes sense. In that 10 days, though, I
But please don't
rounded
do
that
that.
peak.
But yeah.
Don't do that. No, please,
don't do
please
that.
don't
It's
do
temporary.
that. You can get through this. You can get through this. It just requires an extraordinary amount of patience and some support, but you can get through this. I got through it. So yeah, I'm sorry I said that way.
It's okay. No, I just wanted to make sure they round the curve. Don't stop at the curve.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
No, so I went over the peak, and by the 10 days later, the foaming at the mouth had stopped. I could see that there was some improvement. And so in my linear mind, I said, "Oh, my nose is down. I'm coming back down off that thing. By my estimation, 3 months, I'm going to be back to normal." I was profoundly wrong. I didn't know
Little
that.
did you know.
But at this point, my distrust for the guy was well-founded.
But you ended up reinstating Valium and then appropriately tapering shortly after?
Not with him.
Not with him.
My trust in this man, this particular physician, it became very clear to me what had happened to me. And it was his fault. There was no informed consent. He didn't even understand the mechanism of action, the dangers, the side effects, the deprescribing. He didn't know. He's not a bad guy. He just was incompetent, and so I wasn't having anything to do with that guy. But I did go over that peak. And so when the Valium showed up at my house, I went, screw that. I'm not taking more of this poison. And I threw them away. What I did not understand that curve you come down off is very asymptotic and very long. And, unfortunately, I'm one of the 15 to 20% of the population that has an exquisite sensitivity to benzodiazepines, meaning that, my tolerance came up very quickly and was profound. And it just kept going. I mean, my body did everything it could to fight off that Ativan. And those adaptations put me in that state where I was just so extremely dysregulated, almost to the point where I'm sure I was close to dying. I mean, I was foaming at the mouth. I was probably having seizures without realizing what it was. And, I never thought to go to the emergency room. I was out of my mind. I couldn't put all that together. I was just trying to survive from, minute to minute. But so I refused that, resigned myself to just recovering on my own. And what that looked like was the following. I sat in a darkened room, blackout blinds pulled 24 hours a day. I couldn't stand light. I had the air conditioning all the way down, below 65, because I couldn't tolerate any heat. The sound of the air conditioning was like having my head in a jet intake. It was so loud. It was like being at a rock concert. So I wore noise-canceling over-the-ear noise-canceling headphones all the time. I made a nest of beanbag chairs and blankets, and I spent my days sitting in there rocking back and forth, just going, this will pass, this will pass, this will pass, just telling myself this will pass. And, here and there, reading was extremely difficult. But I had to understand what was going on with it. And so I resigned myself to, educating. Have you ever seen badbenzos.org?
I don't remember that. No, I don't think I've ever seen it. Not that site.
It's a little website. It's the first piece of hope that I found. I encourage people to check it out. It's a very tiny little website. It tells the story of a girl, I think her name's Kat. She went through all of this too.
I do know who you're talking about. Yes, I do.
Yeah, she went through all of this too, and decided to end her life. If you read her story, again, I wish she hadn't, because she could have powered through, but she lost hope, and it was so bad, and she just didn't have the strength. And
I think her parents put that up after she died. Wasn't that what happened?
Well, she did a wonderful thing. she did a wonderful service to humanity is she wrote 2 letters. She wrote a letter to her friends and she wrote a letter to professionals. And there's a lot of overlap in those 2 letters, but she described her entire benzodiazepine journey, and everything she went through that led to her eventual suicide. But it's very well written and it's just heart-wrenching. But I read that and I went, I'm not the only one going through this. And I'll tell you, Angie, just to know that I wasn't alone, that was the beginning of hope for getting out of it.
Did it scare you that she died?
It did. And I said, I'm not doing that. That terrified me because I completely understood how she got there. And, I've said this many times. I have 2 sons. They're the pride of my life there. Oh, I'm getting choked up. Sorry.
Don't say sorry.
If I didn't, don't say sorry. No, feel it. Just feeling it.
Feel that.
I love those boys, and they're 21 and 23 now. So that, they were in their early teens at that. I couldn't do that to them.
And that was your fight. I got to stay alive for them.
That was it.
Yeah.
I had to stay alive for my kids. That was it. If I did not have those boys, I would have just blown my brains out. The math made perfect sense to me in the moment. Thank God I didn't. But at the time, it's like, if this is my life, it's not worth living. I got to that point and I had to talk myself out of pulling the trigger many, many times. But, during that 7 months in that dark room, I stumbled across a guy. His name's Dr. Michael Bohan.
I know him too. Yeah.
Of course you do, because he was the chief of medicine at Portsmouth Naval Medical Center. So he's retired 06, a wonderful man, an incredible physician, a great human being. And he had been deprescribing for many years. So I found him, and, the warm hug of competence that I got from him really, it saved.
And he's also, he's like a grandfatherly figure. Like, you feel safe around him. You just do. Like the way,
he
just his man, the way he is. Yeah.
He's a great guy. And, another thing I found was the Benzodiazepine Information Coalition.
Yeah.
I'm sure you know Nicole.
Did you come to that screening?
Lamberson.
We did a screening with Michael Bohan, Nicole, me, but it was in Nicole's town.
It was in Williamsburg. And Dr. Bohan had never heard of the Benzodiazepine Information Coalition. Nicole invited me, and I was at an appointment with him, and I said, "Hey, Doc, you want to go to this thing with me?" And we were going to go together, but I had a horrible wave going.
You were too sick,
day,
I think.
So he went without me. And
Amazing.
he's now on the board of the Benzodiazepine Information Coalition. By the way, if you're listening to this and you want the source of information about benzodiazepines, please go there, donate to them. It is a wonderful product that she's putting out. Skip Christy Huff's story, but, and there's some forums. Benzo Buddies was really helpful to me. Dr. Bohan hooked me up with a couple of his previous patients who were further down the road than I was. One a couple of years, one probably 5 or 6 years. The friendship and brotherhood I got from those local guys was incredible. It was absolutely essential to keeping going through some of the worst days. So I'm really grateful for all that. But there's a huge ecosystem of people recovering from benzodiazepines out there.
Huge.
It's massive.
It's huge. Yeah.
And here's a psychiatrist prescribing me Ativan. Has never even heard of it. He didn't even believe it was a thing.
And that's why a lot of doctors say, I've never seen benzo withdrawal, or I've never seen people that had such a big. First of all, they don't ask the right questions. And then when you present at a doctor's office and you say, I have more anxiety than I've ever had in my entire life, and I want to rip my skin off, and I have derealization and depersonalization, they either see that as evidence of a worsening relapse or a new condition, rather than this is an iatrogenic illness from withdrawal, from abrupt cessation, cold turkey. Like they can't even see akathisia if it slapped them in the face. It's ridiculous.
It's because their model Their model is wrong. That's the problem. You know,
Well,
when
where's
a
my glasses
perfectly
here?
healthy guy, a perfectly healthy guy like me who's been under
Yeah.
decades of intense scrutiny, all of a sudden is having panic attacks. The question to ask
why?
is, why are you having a panic attack? Not how do we suppress the symptoms?
Right.
It's the wrong freaking question. And I'll tell you what, Angie, I going back and looking at what happened to me, I can't even say it's one thing. And this is one of the problems with military veterans, particularly combat veterans, and the VA system is, you need to identify a specific causal relationship to this condition to tie it to your service and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's any one thing
It's a lot.
that I experienced. It's a lot of things. So here's the list. After many years of looking back at what happened to me and recognizing that, I was going downhill much sooner. I would say 2005, I was headed downhill. And I had some pretty severe moral injury in that year. I think that kind of nosed me over, but there was a lot of stuff going on. So talk about, op tempo. Just deployment, workups, gone from home 50% of the time. I did that my whole career. That's hard. That's a stressor. You're away from your family. You don't have that support. You're living, I'm in the Navy, so I'm living in a smelly steel box with hammers and chains banging and airplanes landing on the roof and, so you poor sleep.
Yeah. MREs, meals ready to eat with crappy nutrition. Yeah. Preservatives and
chronic
MSG.
Stress.
Yeah.
Poor sleep, poor nutrition, water contaminated with jet fuel, drinking it, showering in it all the time. People don't realize that. You turn on the shower, it smells like jet fuel. It's just ships. Constantly soaked in RF of, from
radiation.
DC to light, every wavelength you can, yeah, exactly. RF radiation. Inhaling jet exhaust, hydraulic
JP8
fluid.
for us. We have the same. It's so much toxic exposure and being in the military that I don't think we even appreciate. Burn pits in Iraq, we ran past them and I would cover my face while I ran. That doesn't do anything. But then now our cancer rate is higher because we're exposed to so many chemicals. Multiple vaccines. 100%. They forced us to get birth control shots going to Iraq, and my breasts hurt so bad I couldn't even wear a flak jacket because the hormonal fluctuation, like all these things are pounded. But I want to back up really quick just about operational tempo, because people are not going to understand what that means. That means when you're running convoys every day and you're working night shift and you're missing sleep, and then your neighbor gets bombed and you hear about a shooting and boom, boom, every day is a trauma. We talk about C-PTSD. It's like you're living in the sauce for months. There's no exit. You're in it. You're in a trauma actively. And I would say there's a fear learning component to post-traumatic stress. Like, this is the way I felt it. When you start training for combat and they tell you all these scenarios and you run and you practice and you repeat and you practice it and you're just like looking for it. And then you start getting your head on a swivel. You start getting that hypervigilance. And now you're threat detecting at a higher rate than you ever had to. And then you get thrown into a war zone and you have to use that. And it's adaptive and it keeps your buddies alive. But then you fly back to the United States and they say that's a disease. But you trained me that way.
Right. So there's the nut of it. So, I just listed all kinds of toxic exposure. Let me finish that list. So I'm also breathing manufactured gases. So they're manufactured using air that's pulled off the compressor section of my jet engine, contaminated with fuel and fuel additives. I've got a 10,000 watt radar down by my feet. I'm flying at 40,000 feet with nothing but a little piece of plexiglass between me and outer space. So all this toxic exposure. Now you add catapult launches where your brain is squashed against the back of your skull and then snaps forward. Carrier landings. I've landed on an aircraft carrier over 600 times. Every time is a minor car accident. You get slammed forward, right? So your brain deforms. You have all these micro tears in your brain, toxic exposure. And like you said, chronic stress, right? When you're operating an aircraft like that, you don't get to not be on. You can't have bad days. People die.
No. Yep.
And we're flying, particularly in Afghanistan. I mean, I'm in the airplane 8-10 hours at a time. Multiple, you got to hit the airborne refueling, multiple refueling hits, dropping bombs, occasionally getting shot at, working the radios, keeping track of your wingman. I mean, it is
stress
bring your
like
A game
civilians,
every freaking time.
Yeah. Top of your game. Have to be.
Imagine the most important presentation you ever made in your professional life in front of the board of directors and your career depends on it. That's every day at work, all day long. You can't, the amount of pressure. And I'm not bitching about it. I loved it.
We do it proudly.
I liked the stress.
Yes.
I did it proudly. I wanted to do it. And I had tremendous success. I got medals all over my chest and all this stuff. That's great. But you can't expect a human to do that and not have adaptations occur that are durable. And so when you're constantly operating on the threshold of fight or flight, which is really where you are when you're that on all the time, you just get stuck there.
Exactly.
It's just you. And then you come back stateside and everything is slow and stupid and nobody has any purpose.
Incompetent,
and everyone's all over the
lazy,
place. And you hate everybody because they're all stupid and that guy can't drive. And,
why is my dry cleaning late and my dog's bath is not on time? And you're just like, there's way more important things than that. Like, it's just mundane and there's no adrenaline like we're so used to. And that's why guys I skydived, motorcycles, drugs. It's so easy to slip into that because we are so used to this, and you come down and there's really no support for that. The intensity is gone. The community of your brothers, everything about everybody you live and work with, and you care deeply about them. And then you come back to the society that thinks you're a pariah. And like, for me, it was like something happened to Angie. We don't really know, but like
I got
she's
arrested.
On 18 meds.
I had way too much law enforcement interaction there for a while. And I'm a good law-abiding citizen. Pretty. I was. But it all seems stupid. It's all stupid. You come back and it's stupid. And I know we're going to talk about psychedelic-assisted therapy.
We're going to do that next.
And I'll throw that right out front. We do a terrible job of decompressing people when they come back over the fence out of a combat operation. What do? We send them to Germany for a couple of days. What do? They just drink their faces off, which is like the worst thing you can do. They just get shit-faced. They're all tired and worn out. And then they go home and we traumatize our families. We don't mean to, but we do. There's no adaptation in there. And I'll tell you what, after seeing, personally witnessing probably around 500 Ibogaine treatments, I will tell you this. If we treated combat vets with Ibogaine on their way home, we would save marriages, we would save careers, we would save human lives, we would improve our combat effectiveness, and we would save shit tons of money. Because what's it take, when I'm a guy who's, the Navy spent $20-30 million training me. Well, if I'm not deployable, there's no ROI, it's gone. So even as a taxpayer, I'm going, my God, if these guys have been in the shit running convoys, they're doing firefights, kicking doors, any kind of fighting, they should be offered
at least
this opportunity to use a naturally occurring plant to take your nervous system down off that high perch and get you back somewhere more reasonable. And I'll tell you, Ibogaine does that.
And within 72 hours,
absolutely does that.
Within 72 hours of landing in Germany, I was given a benzo. Within 72 hours, from combat to Germany on a benzo. Yeah.
And was it because going back to a normal world stressed you out, or?
Well, it was because the day I left combat, I didn't kick doors in. So I always feel weird using that word, but I don't know what else to call it because I was in Baghdad in 2003. That's what it is. You're about to die any minute.
Not a safe place.
Yeah, it's not a safe place. Yeah. But no, my convoy got hit the day after I was medevaced. So then I had to see my soldier return, and he told me the story, and it was like my cup for trauma. Just if I had 1 ounce left, it just got filled, and my system was like, nope, I cannot hold any more trauma. I'm done. Because, I had lived 6 months in Baghdad, high op tempo, sick, poisoned, and it was just like the thing that broke the camel's back. And I walked straight to psychiatry, and that was the worst decision I ever made. That was the day that I was given a benzo.
There seems to be a threshold, right?
That was my
There's
threshold.
this accumulated, it's like a tripwire. You get to a certain level and just the wheels come off. And I'll tell you, God bless our men and women in uniform, because these are some of the toughest people. The ability to compartmentalize the things I put in my pack to deal with later. I look back now, I'm like, this is insane.
Insane.
Remember Raiders of the Lost Ark at the end? They take they put the Ark in a box, and the forklift takes it into the warehouse and stuffs it in there with all this. Right. That was my trauma warehouse.
Yeah. I'm writing my book.
I had an elephant. Elephant in every box. There was hundreds of them. I hadn't dealt with any of it. And it was going back to my childhood too.
For sure.
A lot of these military, and I'll tell you, working in a clinical environment now, I say all the time, in 2005, I delivered a weapon that killed a dozen innocent people in a preventable accident. And that happened to me. I used to start my story with that, but after having done many years of putting myself back together and seeing other guys and gals go through this, there's usually something in your childhood too. There's something about your view of yourself or how you fit into society, or your lack of tools for coping with difficult, subjects and stuff. I mean, everyone seems to have some of that in
everybody. Yeah, everybody does. Yeah.
Yeah, everybody does. And because there are some people who go through combat trauma and just manage to put themselves back together at some point,
There is. Yeah.
So some of us are set up for it. There's a lot of code running in the background. Our subconscious mind is very vast, and it has a lot to do with how we experience our life and how we see ourselves in it. So that's a foundation upon which, some tough challenges are built.
It just snowballs at a point, and then you crack, So really quick, because I just know the audience is going to ask this question in the comments, so I'm going to beat them to it. But I really want to talk about psychedelics, and I only have about 10 minutes left on my air conditioner, and it's about to die. My batteries are really low. So I'm going to do this one really quick, but then I want to talk about psychedelics for a good chunk. So did you reinstate the Valium with Dr. Bohan and then do a safe taper? And how did that go? Just like in a couple sentences.
Yeah, I did reinstate. 20 milligrams of Valium was, kind of the starting point we considered. I think we probably should have gone 30 or 40. He was still learning too at that point. But he understood the principles at least. I think I ended up, I'm trying to remember, I tapered off the Ativan. Nope. Yeah. So we did the Valium replacement right away. I think I was at 10 milligrams. Because that was, if I got more than that, it just made me sleepy. And, even though Valium's a benzodiazepine, it's different than Ativan.
Yeah. And
so it just made me sleepy. So 10 milligrams of Valium's where I started. And it took me 2.5 years to taper off of it. I got down to about 0.5 milligram and just hit a wall. And I had to go to 1 microgram a day. That's the most taper I could handle. And I had to hold many times, even on that. But, that was 2.5 years of not leaving the house. Social interaction or a noisy restaurant or even traffic was just overwhelming for me. I did during that period coach some lacrosse, which looking back now, I don't know how I did.
How did you do that? I understand.
Well,
I think it grounds us in reality just enough to give us some kind of hit from that, but it is not, it's a horror show. Like, let's be real.
It was a horror show. I understood that I needed somewhere, and it was subconscious. I've read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. Great book.
I have it right here. Oh no, I have it.
There you go. Everyone should read that. But somewhere in my psyche, I understood that I needed something, because if my entire life was just laying on the couch waiting, to do it again tomorrow, that might have not worked out for me. So, I grabbed onto something, and it's funny because, I would show up for a 2-hour practice in the afternoons. And, nobody there understood that I'd spent my entire day shaping nutrition, hydration, sleep, everything I could do to try to not be out of my freaking mind when I showed up for practice. And I would show up there, I would run the practice, and I'll tell you, I look back now, there were times I couldn't remember my players' names. There were times I forgot what we were doing. I somehow managed to be somewhat successful as a coach, but I will tell you that I probably was pretty cranky. I was,
to say the least.
Yeah,
but you did it.
I may have not been the most approachable guy for a while there, but apologies if you're someone I coached or I coached your kids. Like,
now you understand.
I love those boys, and they saved my life, and I did the best I could.
Amazing. I'm glad they were there for you, honestly. Okay,
you've
so
got to have a purpose. The point is find a purpose.
Yes. So here's the good part, because this is why I do this work, is because I get to see people recover. It's not pretty. It's not easy. It's the hardest thing, as you know, we're both saying, the hardest thing, worse than anything we've ever been through. But what was your recovery process like? What was your last day? What was your last day of Valium? When was that? How many years off are you?
That was 5 years ago, early November of 2025. So it must have been November 2020.
Congratulations. Right before the pandemic, huh?
Yeah.
Or during the pandemic?
During the pandemic. So, they came up with the term social.
Yeah.
Well, they came up with the term social distancing. And I remember the first time I heard that, I'm like, I've been doing that for years. I got that.
Same.
I'll tell you what was horrible, Angie, is I was horribly paranoid. I was depressed. I was anxious. And then I had the 24-hour-a-day doom scroller on my 65-inch TV. And I just sat there like this going, oh, my.
We're going to die.
That was traumatizing, too.
I agree.
Don't even get me started on how stupid all that was. But
I was in the van watching it on my phone, just freaking myself out every single day. Like, this is not good. But it was a good excuse not to be in public. I like that part.
Well, it provided some cover for me. But yeah, once I finally got off, I mean, there's no miraculous moment where I felt better. I felt like hell when I got off. I mean, my anxiety was still terrible. I mean, I was not good. I was better than I was 2 years ago by a lot, but I was not a functional human being. I had no breaks. I talked a million miles a minute. I said inappropriate things. I got angry. I couldn't slow down. I was still struggling with sleep, all that stuff. But oddly, right about the time I wrapped up my taper, a guy I knew from the fighter community happened to go to Mexico to do something called an Ibogaine treatment. So it's Ibogaine and 5-MeO-DMT, call them psychedelics for now. But my buddy, he went through and he came back and he told his story. And I'll tell you, Angie, I wouldn't have been open to such a thing if I hadn't heard someone from my community who I knew to be not insane and generally professional. If I hadn't heard him say that, I wouldn't have been open to it. I would have said that's some long hair hippie bullshit, gone trudging off.
But were you worried? Because I'm pretty sure like Benzo Buddies, all these places online, and I'm one of them. I'm terrified to touch my brain chemicals ever again. So like, were you scared of it? Or were you like open to it because you were that desperate? Or what was the motivation?
God, how did I feel going down there?
Were you scared?
No, I was hopeful. I was really hopeful, because he told that story, and I believed him. And, all these guys were going through this stuff, and, it was starting to show up in the media a little bit. And I was hopeful. I think I was too far out there to be scared.
Interesting.
I was too desperate to be scared. and I went down there very hopeful. And I'll tell you, I wasn't functional. You know, when I walked in the door down there, I was wired out of my mind. Mile a minute. I mean, I'm sure I was insufferable. I don't have, I have no trouble understanding why I lost some friends and stuff. But I'll tell you, one treatment, and I walked out of there positive about my life. My anxiety was dramatically reduced. I would say like 50%. It also gave me an additional awareness of my own thought processes. A lot of loops. So when you're going through stuff like that, you get in these loops, these thought loops.
Yeah.
And the more you traverse the same loop, the more those pathways wire, and they get harder and harder to get out of. So one of the things that Ibogaine is really good at is pattern interruption. And so some of these loops, these, regret, rumination, fear, shame, it was just all these loops that were running. It just kind of broke me out of them. The
What
other
pathway?
thing it did,
do they know by what pathway? Like, what's the hypothesis?
We have some very solid theories. So we're going to have to talk about the difference between Ibogaine and these other psychedelics, but I will reference something called the entropic brain hypothesis. This is a white paper written by a guy named Dr. Robin Carhart Harris, who studied at the Imperial College of London, is now at UC San Francisco. He's a guy who used brain scans to analyze what happens during a psychedelic experience. And to summarize that as briefly as possible, everything fires. You have chaos. You have a state of high entropy. So all everything's lit up. And that has the effect of weakening those pathways. I liken it to an Etch-a-Sketch. So if you draw something on an Etch-a-Sketch, maybe I draw a house. I draw it over and over again. You're a little kid, you go over it and over it, you make it nice and dark. And I got a nice house on there, right? That represents the neural connections I've built in my default mode network, which is a set of neural interconnections, which your self-talk lives in, basically. So you build all these pathways and you reinforce them by traversing them over and over and over again. By creating a high state of entropy, everything's firing. And it's like taking an Etch-a-Sketch and shaking it up. It just dulls those pathways. Or another metaphor for it is tracks in the snow on a mountain. You get the freshies in the morning, you can make your own path, right? But it starts getting skied out, you kind of end up in other people's tracks. Well, you end up in your own tracks when you get stuck in a lot of these things, addictions.
Yeah.
But it creates this high state of neurological entropy, which weakens those connections and gives you a window during which you can reprogram your own default mode.
I understand.
That is additionally enhanced by that Ibogaine, unlike the others. Ibogaine increases BDNF and GDNF by 400 or 500%. BDNF is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and GDNF is glial-derived neurotrophic factor. These control neuroinflammation and your rate of neurogenesis. So it makes you very neuroplastic, which gives you an opportunity to retrain.
Yeah, I have a pushback about that, though, because I've read some interesting theories that the BDNF, GDNF is created because the brain does interpret that as sort of an injury. So then there's a reason to upregulate, you know what I'm saying? To send more troops to the site. So I don't know about that. I don't think they know that for sure or not, but that could go both ways. Like, that's a good thing, but we might also have that from Ativan because it injured us in some way. Like, I don't know. I don't think anybody's checked that out.
I've seen that theory. Ibogaine research is desperately needed. I don't think we do not understand all the mechanisms of actions. If it is an injury response, I will tell you that it's a good injury.
It's a good one. Well, not for everybody, but
because
almost everybody. Yeah.
Well, I doubt that. having had this experience, and I've been through 4 Ibogaine treatments in the last 5 years, just because I happen to have access to that, and I've been able to, experiment with myself a little bit. I've also microdosed Ibogaine on and off for many years. I found that to be extremely helpful, much more so than psilocybin, by the way. Yeah, so it breaks those patterns. It accelerates neurological repair. But the other thing that happened to me when I went down there, and something I was not looking for, is it gave me a context for everything I'd been through. I was not a religious or even a spiritual guy. I was very much a materialist, reductionist engineer, very much of this world kind of guy, skeptical of everything. But I went down there and I had a profound mystical experience. And I don't think we should ignore that in these therapeutic contexts. I didn't have a coherent model of the meaning of life or birth and death, or what it all means. I just didn't have any of that, and I got that through a psychedelic experience. And I will tell you that there is a very profound moment when I wrote in my journal, my suffering is a gift, because I was living in, why did this happen to me? I didn't deserve this. I want to fricking kill the guy who prescribed it to me. It was just all this negativity that I was wallowing in. And I came through there, and this thing was delivered to me, this idea that the suffering that you are able to recover from is training to do something wonderful for other people who are suffering, and I keep seeing this. I see this with a lot of guys, men and women who go through these things. They come out of it and they went, I had given up all hope. I certainly had. People talk about staring into the abyss. I jumped. I didn't care if I died for a while, but for whatever reason, I have a hand to put me back up on that ledge. And I came to realize, I'm like, the suffering you endure in this life makes you stronger. And if you can take it and turn it into something good, then you've been given a tremendous gift, because to be able to speak to this from the depths of hell that I was in, it gives me the ability to connect with people who are also in that hell, and so I feel like I've been given not only a gift, but a calling. We got to keep our brothers and sisters from killing themselves. It's ridiculous. The number of people I know have committed suicide. No one should have a list that.
My list is very long. Yeah, 2.
Yeah, and the system has failed us. So, what's happened is some highly motivated veterans have gone outside the country to find something that works, and it works well, and it's affordable and durable, and it gets you off all those freaking meds. I'll tell you, I see people walk into the clinic all the time with a freezer bag full of meds. They do one Ibogaine treatment, they walk out of there. Oftentimes they're off of all of them, or most of them, depending on what it is. I see guys throw the meds away all the time, and they don't go back on them. Okay, so this executive order.
I know it scares me.
Well, I'm holding back a little. I don't want to say you're going to get off all your psych meds if you do an Ibogaine treatment. I'm not saying that, but it's going to be much easier to get off of them, because you're just so much more regulated when you come out of an Ibogaine treatment. It just resets all these receptors where their gains have been, up regulation and down regulation, all these fights your body has to try to be normal when you're putting all these poisons in you. And the Ibogaine just seems to take it all and kind of put it back in the middle, and then you readjust. Now, can we talk about psychedelics in general a little bit?
Yeah, but really quick, can you give informed consent, just the good and the bad? Because I want to balance risk, because it's very important to me. Just that, like, what are the risks inherent with Ibogaine and psychedelics? Could you just say that, and then yes, do the rest?
There you go. And this is an important thing, because an Ibogaine treatment is not for everybody. Let me just throw that out there right now. I would love to have some bold adventurers who are very early in their withdrawal journeys. I would love to see them go down and try this, but it could be rough.
What would make it
When
rough?
your anxiety is, well,
Yeah.
because your anxiety is so bad. So it's important to make a distinction here. I can't avoid this. So when people think of psychedelics, they generally think of like LSD or mushrooms or
Ecstasy.
ayahuasca.
Mhm.
Yeah, so MDMA has been mislabeled a little bit. It has some psychedelic-like properties at very high doses, but it's not really a psychedelic. It's a methamphetamine. Yeah, and it does get lumped in there, and I understand why people who don't understand the differences between these things do that. So it's okay, but it's not really a psychedelic. Those other ones I just named, though, the more traditional psychedelics that people are familiar with, those can cause a lot of anxiety on their own. Even a healthy person can have a really anxious episode on those things. And that's why when you're using psychedelics, either recreationally or in a clinical environment, certainly in a clinical environment, set and setting are very important. So your mindset and the physical setting in which you do it. Your mindset has to be, I'm going to go in here, I'm going to use this tool to enhance my introspection, my understanding of my own processes and to heal. That's very different than I'm at the fish show and somebody just handed me 2 blotters, like very, very different thing. So that's all very important. But those psychedelics can cause a lot of anxiety. And I would say for someone coming off of benzos, my personal recommendation, with absolutely no clinical analysis here, just observations of
General.
lived experiences, I'd be careful about those early in your journey with deprescription and recovery.
Yeah.
Ibogaine is different. I wouldn't even classify Ibogaine as a psychedelic. It's certainly not a traditional psychedelic. The term that some of us are playing with is oneirogen, with psychedelic-like side effects for a lot of people. What is an oneirogen? An oneirogen is something that induces a waking dream state. What happens when you dream? When you sleep at night without psychedelics, you fall asleep, you have dreams. Why do you have dreams? Because your subconscious mind, that's things bubbling up that need attention. That's when you resolve and repack and organize your subconscious. But you normally don't have a lot of control over that as you're asleep. Some people practice lucid dreaming, which you can teach yourself to do, but generally you don't have that kind of control. When you go into an Ibogaine experience, it's as if you're in a dream, but you have lots of control over it. And it's like 12 hours. And so during that time, it's as if the door between your subconscious and conscious have been opened. And you can see very clearly what goes on in your own subconscious. You can see the processes. You can see childhood traumas or messages that you received that were not received as they were intended. That's certainly my case, some things with my parents. And, you get to see all that stuff. And through that understanding, it really gives you, it's like a turbo booster for your own therapy. Like doing therapy on yourself, like, oh my God, my dad did this when I was a little kid, and I thought that, I wasn't good enough, and that made me do all these things, and that led to this. And you just see the map. And there's something about Ibogaine in particular where it's super honest. It's like truth serum for yourself. And so you get in there and you get to sort all these things out. Now, sometimes that comes with a profound mystical experience. I've certainly had that. That's not where the healing comes from. And this is a big point I want to make. People do not understand this. They think, oh, I tripped ball, I see God, Jesus ran his fingers through my hair and I was better. That is not what happens. That is not it. I've told a couple of stories publicly about my profound mystical experiences, and they're great stories, and go ahead and listen to them. But that is not how this works. That is a side effect. Generally, a lot of people see some random crap all night. It's a long night. It's hard. They puke a few times and they're super tired the next day, and it takes them 24 hours to recover. That's an Ibogaine experience. It's not about tripping and what I saw. The other thing is there seems to be some kind of neurological rejuvenation that happens. This has shown up with traumatic brain injuries in particular. There's the Stanford study that Veterans Exploring Treatment Solutions, vets, and Ambia Life Sciences, where I work, the clinic where I work, and Stanford took 30 special operations veterans with diagnosed TBIs. They put them through functional MRIs. They did a battery of cognitive tests. They sent them down to Mexico. They did one Ibogaine treatment, no 5-MeO-DMT, just the Ibogaine. Brought them right back to Stanford, repeated the same battery of tests and imagery. Profound healing. Like a lot of the TBIs were gone. All of them were greatly improved. Everybody improved cognitive performance-wise, and it's durable. So there is something physical going on here. It's also true with peripheral neuropathy. I've seen guys who had a surgery on my foot. We had an NHL player, had a surgery on his foot. They botched it, had horrible neuropathic pain in his foot. He ended his career. He came in on a cane, barely could walk. He was in so much pain. He left after one treatment. He said, my pain's almost nothing. I've
Wow.
stayed in contact with him, by the way. He's, over a year or so, the pain's back, maybe half of what it used to be. But his relationship with the pain has changed.
Interesting.
He's not spending all day ruminating about the misery and what he's lost. He's here now. So there's Bell's palsy. We had a woman with Bell's palsy recently, showed up with the right side of her face was all droopy. One Ibogaine treatment, bam, she's got her face back.
What the heck? Wow, that's fascinating.
Multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS, all these neurological things seem to improve with an Ibogaine treatment. So it's got some kind of cellular level rejuvenation that it does. No, we don't understand the mechanisms. That's why we desperately need research. What we do know is it works. Many thousands of guys have gone through, and women have gone through this program. It works. So that's why this executive order that the president just signed, is such a huge deal. And, the political polarization of our society is one of the most horrible things I've seen in my life. You have a bunch of combat veterans who are watching their friends die. They go to Mexico. They find a way to save themselves because the VA is making them worse. And we've been doing this for 10 years. People have been going down there and doing this stuff. We have many thousands of success stories. And we're getting some traction with, convincing the federal government to deschedule this stuff and do research and stuff, but it's been really painful. I mean, the amount of advocacy up in DC and even at the state level, the amount of energy that's gone that's incredible. One text message from a podcaster, and next thing you know, the president of the United States is signing an executive order saying, hey, get off your ass and figure this stuff out. But you know what happened? The people who wear the other color from the guy who happens to be in the White House right now are turning their noses up.
Because they're making this political, just like deprescribing is becoming
because it's political now.
Yeah.
What? Because so if your guy did it, a couple of years ago, you would have been gung ho, and then would the other side have been like, "Screw you, we're not healing our veterans. It's a donkey." Oh my God, this needs to stop.
I know.
All these politicians, stop.
Trying to get a Democrat.
This
is it's a human.
The Democrats are the people who were hippie. Yeah, free love. Let's all do LSD. They're the ones who are supposed to be open to this stuff. And now, this is ridiculous, Angie. If you're a politician or if you're proximate to a politician, go grab that and go, this is about humans. Please stop. People are dying. Do you realize? 140,000 veterans have committed suicide since 9/11.
More than
we lose in combat. Less than 5,000.
More than in combat. Yep.
Yeah, this is a freaking emergency.
But here's the interesting thing, though, because the Republicans are defunding VA in a lot of ways and dismantling it. And, they put that thing out, was about a year ago, where they were going to say, if you're off your meds, then we're going to take your disability rating. But most of us are off our meds because the meds don't work and made us worse. It's not because we're better. Like, it shows in that benzo guidance, benzos make PTSD worse, not better. So then a bunch of us are off.
I don't know.
But I'm just finding it interesting. The Republicans are screwing with the VA. And I would say, like, the first time I've ever seen where there was some, like, Ted Cruz said some disparaging things about veterans. And on Capitol Hill. But then the Democrats are also like, I ain't touching that with a 10-foot pole. So it's like, I don't know how this is gonna go.
Yeah, so we're stuck
scary.
in inaction.
Bureaucracy.
We're stuck with inactionville because, well, I think the problem with the VA, and I don't know so much that it's Democrats or Republicans. I mean, I think that's happened on both sides in recent years. But the problem, I think, with the VA, and there are good people at the VA. I'm going to slam VA here in a second. There's plenty of good people at the VA who want to do good things. The problem with the VA is somewhat structural and somewhat cultural. One problem is it's a bureaucratic organization, and any bureaucratic organization, if it grows large enough, ceases to serve the function that it was created for. It's self-perpetuation and getting more budget next year. That's what administration is after. And the number of administrators, and it's true in our schools and civilian hospital systems too, there's too much administration. You got all these high-paid employees who are completely detached from what's going on the clinical level, making stupid decisions like that. Like, yeah, my Ativan was killing me. I got off of it. I'm still all fucked up, but now I lose my rating? Like, are you kidding me? I can't work.
Right.
The system is so broken. The
and one more
application
thing.
and screening process.
One more. $571 million is in the targeted suicide prevention efforts for for fiscal year 2027, the VA will spend, and DOD, $3.67 billion for suicide prevention. And
really?
They are, yes.
Put it all into Ibogaine treatments.
No,
all of it.
Maybe some of it might be in psychedelics. I don't know, but a lot of it is not including their deprescribing crisis, their overprescribing crisis, and the reason veterans are looking for other treatments is because the ones they are offering are making us worse. And anyway, there's so much wrong with that, and I've done talks about this many times, but it's not working, guys. Okay, our veterans, and me and Mark included, are being harmed on a mass scale, and we are some of the most intelligent, motivated, physically and mentally agile people on the planet. And you got to ask yourself, why is that? And I think before I ask you our final question, I'm going to bring these out because these are my silly glasses, because when you think you see all but illness in DSM-5, we are asking you, take those glasses off for a second, put some other glasses on, and see that your treatments are making people worse, not better. And I'm really sorry. That's an inconvenient truth. And your paycheck depends on you not seeing that. Okay. But me and Mark together collectively have probably lost 40 friends to suicide. It's fucking disgusting. Okay. Thank you for letting me get upset, and I could scream right now. But the reason we don't go back to VA and we are leaving en masse is because you guys are hurting us. I don't know what else to say. What do you think before I scream? And then we'll end.
That's absolutely true. And, like I said, I have a group comes in every week at the clinic down in Mexico. A group comes in every week. They're all anxious and depressed. Many are suicidal. All of them. They are all on psych meds. The vast majority of them from the VA. Not a single person has ever told me that any of those meds made their lives better. As a matter of fact, by the time they get down there, every single person says, these made my life worse, and I don't know anyone who has experienced anything different than that. And they tell these guys, you're going to be on this for the rest of your life. And if you look at the bill, when you're taking 10 psych meds, 10, 20, 30 grand a month for the rest of my life, that's a grift, man.
And you're getting disability payments that make you know that you have to stay in treatment to keep getting those payments. And maybe that's not explicitly stated, but it's a rumor. It's not true, by the way. VFW confirmed this for me recently on Capitol Hill. That is not true. That if you somehow come off your meds or get on less, that the VA is going to take your benefit payments away. They did threaten that a year ago. It didn't go very far. It lasted about a week, I think.
Look at what that incentivizes, Angie.
Yeah.
Look at what it incentivizes. This is so public policy must always be measured with this. Does that policy incentivize desirable behaviors? That's got to be the metric, right? So what does that incentivize? Okay, send me my $30,000 worth of pills every month. I'm going to throw them in the garbage.
I see lots of veterans do that.
That's what it incentivizes.
But
Yeah.
I think like I was well-meaning. I was a young soldier, 24 years old when this happened to me, okay? I just was listening to my doctors. They are wearing a uniform too. And they're telling me this is what's best for you. This is what you need. This is going to help you. And the next thing I know, I did think they worked for me at the beginning. But next thing I know, I'm living another life. And I'm like, wait a minute. 10 years ago, I was in Baghdad running 8-minute miles and getting more awards than my commanders. How the fuck did this happen? Okay. So I don't think we're all out there to get benefits. Don't ever think that I'm saying that. Maybe some people are. Okay. I was not one of them. I was genuinely seeking help, asking for healing, and the answer that I got made me fucking worse. And that is happening to a lot of veterans. And I would even say you can't look at it, you have to look at it over the span of their life. And VA is the best place to get that data because we have it. That this veteran starts out at this. How did they evolve over the next 10 years? What happened? Did they get better or worse? Look at it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But
it's all downhill. Yep.
Yeah, it's usually downhill. But so what my point was, you might see a veteran the first 2 years of treatment say, I'm doing great, I'm doing better. Okay, but follow them. At some point, if they get worse, you got to ask yourself why. If they're on 8 meds, why is this person worse? It's not because their PTSD is getting worse. Maybe it might be your treatment. Okay.
Well, that's it. And the foundation of that. No, I'm with you. You're spot on, Angie.
Thank you.
And what's the source of that? It's two things. It's the medical education system, and a lot of our regulatory agencies have been hijacked by pharma.
Yes. And if you think they're not going to hijack efforts against Ibogaine, you're wrong, because they're going to do that too.
They already are.
Joe Rogan gave us a speed pass. Thank God. But and deprescribing, the APA is already kicking their foot in the park for that,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we have a lot against us. And so I'm going to say this because I say this to a lot of veterans all the time. If you wait on the VA to save you or to fix you, you will die first. Okay. You have to save yourself. And it is the scariest thing you will ever do. And it might not look like Mark's journey and it might not look like mine, but it's in you. Excellence is in you. That heat-seeking missile of healing is in you. You got to find it and look real close at what you're doing to help yourself. And if you don't feel good, there's lots of other things out there to do. You don't have to rely on them for everything. What are your final words?
I would put on top of that, Angie?
Yeah, please. What are your final words?
Everything you need to be a happy, healthy, and fulfilled human being is inside of you already. Stop putting all of that on external sources. You are responsible for your life. And you have to have a questioning attitude. I've got a sticker on the back of my truck that says, question everything. You have to have a questioning attitude if you want to have the best life. You can't just go around and let people sell you things, because we live in a system that's built to make consumers. And it's a form of slavery if you allow it to be. You've got to set yourself free from all these societal expectations and these pressures that cause us to do things that cost us our health. Your health and your peace that's the gold. That's the treasure. That is what the world doesn't want you to have. That's what the world tries to take away from you when you get it. So, those two things, you are responsible for how your life goes, and value the right thing. And I'll tell you what, my sister, it's peace.
It is. There's nothing like it.
Peace. That's it.
You're
wealthy. You don't need much else. Yeah.
And all my brain chemicals, I own them now instead of something else. That too. Amazing. Okay. I asked this question of every guest that I have, and I want to see how you answer. But the last question is, what hope could you give the people that are watching right now?
Yeah. If you're coming off of benzos or any psych med, I will tell you this. When you are in it, it seems like there's no end. It's very easy to not even see your own progress because it's often slow and incremental. Keep journals. Every day, write down, how am I feeling? How are things going? That was so helpful to me. I went back and looked. I went, I'm not getting better. But then I go and look at 6 months ago. I'm like, I am getting better. You will recover. You may not recover all the way. I certainly haven't. I still deal with stuff from this, but I'm happy. My life is good, and you can get there too. Don't give up. Find people who've had similar experiences and are ahead of you. Anyone who's made it through this is going to be happy to help. We all want to help. So, yeah, find some support and just know that it's going to get.
Thank you so much, Mark. That was really fun. I really appreciate. I could talk to you for another 3 hours probably. There's so much more to get to, but we will keep it there. Can you provide, where can people find you if they want to follow you, if they want to learn more about Ibogaine or psychedelic, ideas for veterans? What would your top couple hits be?
Okay, so for finding me, I am far from trying to build a brand or anything, but I'm on Instagram at sliderfighter.com, or .sliderfighter is my handle, not .com. Yeah, where else to go? Read Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind. It is fantastic. It is the definitive primer if you're interested in psychedelic medicine. It talks about history. It talks about economics, law, neuroscience, chemistry, all that stuff's in there. That is a great place to start. There's also a documentary on Netflix by the same name, How to Change Your Mind. It covers some of what's in the book. If you're not a book person, maybe that's helpful to you. In Waves and War, there's a documentary on Netflix, just came out a few months ago, In Waves and War. That follows some Navy SEAL buddies of mine through this process and kind of shows you what it looks like and how it helps you resolve trauma. So all of those are good things. Ambio Life Sciences is absolutely the world leader in this stuff, particularly with veterans. Go check out ambio.life. There's lots of good information on there. And of course, the podcaster universe is just packed with this stuff right now. So Rogan and Sean Ryan have talked about it a lot. But there's tons of them out there. So easy to find. Ibogaine.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Leave a comment below, and I'll send them to Mark when we get a chance. But thanks again, Mark. I really appreciate you being here and sharing so openly. And I appreciate you for surviving and staying alive so that you can transmute your suffering into healing for others. It's awesome.
Everything you said right back at you, my sister.
Thank you. All right. Bye, guys.